You have seen the paintings. A bearded patriarch holds up two stone tablets while light streams from his face, a staff in his hand, a sea splitting behind him. He stands above the water like a man born to lead, calm, certain, chosen. That is the Moses of Sunday school feltboard lessons and Hollywood epics. It is also a flattening of one of the most volatile, argumentative, reluctant, and unfinished characters in the Hebrew Bible. The real Moses does not want the job. He runs from God's first command. He bargains with God on a mountain. He strikes a rock when he is supposed to speak to it. And he dies before he reaches the promise he gave his life to. The real story is harder, and it is much more human. Today we walk through the life of Moses the way the text actually presents him. Not the icon, not the statue. The man Exodus through Deuteronomy describes. 5 movements. A runaway in Midian. A burning bush. 10 plagues and a sea. A mountain on fire. And a grave on a mountain where God himself does the burial. Watch how the text refuses to make him simple. Begin where the story begins. Not at the bush, not at the palace. Begin at the well. Moses is 80 years old when God speaks to him from a burning bush. The Bible tells us that. Acts 7 makes it explicit, and the Exodus math confirms it. 80, which means by the time the famous story starts, Moses has already been a refugee for 40 years. The Egyptian prince has been a Midianite shepherd longer than he was ever an Egyptian. He has a wife named Zipporah and a son named Gershom. The name Gershom comes from the Hebrew root meaning stranger there. Moses named his son after his own exile. 40 years of tending sheep in a desert that nobody else wanted. 40 years of watching the same scrubby horizon. 40 years of hearing his own children speak a language not his own. The man God calls is not a polished prince. He is a man whose first career failed catastrophically. Because Moses did try to lead Israel once. Read Exodus chapter 2. He is 40 years old. He goes out to see his people. He watches an Egyptian beat a Hebrew. He looks one way, then the other, and he kills the Egyptian. He buries the body in the sand. The next day, he intervenes between 2 Hebrews fighting, and one of them turns on him. Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Will you kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Moses learns that the body has been found. He runs. That is how the first chapter of his leadership ends. Not in triumph, in flight. And here is the detail that most retellings miss. The Hebrews do not want him. The very people he tried to save are the ones who expose him. Moses runs from Pharaoh, but he also runs from a community that has just told him he is not their leader. The wilderness is not a sabbatical. The wilderness is exile from 2 sides at once. 40 years pass. Pharaoh dies. Another Pharaoh rises. The Hebrews cry out under the labor. The text says God hears their groaning. And God remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But notice where God goes next. Not to a palace, not to a prophet's school, not to one of the elders of Israel. God goes to the backside of the desert, to a man tending someone else's sheep who has spent 4 decades convincing himself that his story is finished. God's choice of Moses is itself a kind of theological statement. The deliverer is the man who failed his first attempt. The leader is the man who ran. The voice of Israel is the man who has not seen his people in 40 years. That is the foundation under everything that follows. The text is teaching you to expect this pattern. God's people are not led by the strongest or the most willing. They are led by the runaway who never thought he would be asked again. Exodus chapter 3 opens with one of the most economical scenes in Scripture. Moses leads the flock to Horeb, the mountain of God. He sees a bush burning, but the bush is not consumed. He turns aside to look, and the text says, "When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, 'Moses, Moses.' And he said, 'Here I am.' Take off your sandals. The ground you are standing on is holy." What God says next is the commission. "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians." And then the line that changes everything. "Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." This is where most Bible storybooks freeze the scene in awe. The chosen prophet receives his calling. But the actual text is not awe. The actual text is argument. Moses does not say yes. Moses does not say, "Here am I, send me," like Isaiah will. Moses says no. 5 different ways. He offers 5 excuses, and God answers every one of them. Excuse 1. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" God answers, "I will be with you." Excuse 2. "If I come to the children of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" And here God gives Moses his name. In Hebrew, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, translated in the ESV as, "I am who I am." The verb is the root hayah, to be. It can mean I am, it can mean I will be, it can mean I cause to be. The name is a kind of grammatical paradox that refuses to be pinned down. God's name is the verb of existence itself. Excuse 3. "Behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.'" God gives him signs: the staff that becomes a serpent, the hand that becomes leprous and then clean. Excuse 4. "Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent. I am slow of speech and of tongue." The Hebrew is kevad peh and kevad lashon, heavy of mouth, heavy of tongue. Some scholars think Moses had a speech impediment. Others think it is a confession of inadequacy. Either way, the man God is calling does not believe he can speak. Excuse 5. And this is the one where the conversation breaks. "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else." Moses does not give God a new argument. He just refuses. And the text says, "The anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses." But notice what God does not do. God does not strike him down. God does not pick someone else. God gives him a partner. "Is there not Aaron your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. He shall speak for you to the people." The reluctant prophet wins a concession from God himself. The conversation that began with awe ends with negotiation. That is the kind of relationship Moses is going to have with God for the rest of his life. Now the story moves fast. Moses and Aaron come before Pharaoh and say what God told them to say. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go." Pharaoh refuses. The plagues begin. Read the sequence carefully. The plagues are not random punishments. The plagues are targeted demonstrations against the gods of Egypt. The Nile turns to blood. That is the god Hapi humiliated. The frogs swarm. Heket is mocked. The cattle die. Apis and Hathor are powerless. The sun goes dark. Ra himself is silenced. Each plague is a sermon. Each plague is saying to a polytheistic empire, "Your gods are not gods." The 10th plague is the one Israel is supposed to remember forever. The firstborn of Egypt die. The The firstborn of Israel live, because the blood of a lamb is on their doorposts. The Passover is born. And Pharaoh, broken, lets the people go. But Pharaoh changes his mind. He chases them, and Moses and the people reach the sea, with the Egyptian chariots closing in behind them. This is the moment Hollywood remembers. The staff is raised. The waters split. The people walk through on dry ground. But read Exodus 14 carefully. The text gives you a detail that paintings cannot. Verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land. A strong east wind. The Hebrew is ruach kadim, the same word for wind and spirit. The same word that hovered over the waters in Genesis 1 is the word that drives the waters back at the Red Sea. The text wants you to hear the connection. The God who made order out of chaos in the beginning is making a path out of chaos for his people now. The people walk through. The Egyptians follow. The waters return. And the army that enslaved Israel for 400 years dies in a single morning. Then comes the song. Exodus 15. Moses and the people sing. Miriam takes a tambourine and leads the women. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. That is the high point of Moses' story, the most public moment, the moment a man who could not speak leads a nation in worship. And then, immediately, the people start complaining. There is no water. The water they find is bitter. There is no food. Moses spends the next 40 years standing between a stiff-necked nation and a holy God, and most of those years he is exhausted. The hero of the Red Sea is also the man who later begs God to take his life because the burden is too heavy. The story does not pretend leadership is easy. The story tells you what it costs. And here is a detail the text does not let you skip. The body of water Israel crosses is called the Yam Suf in Hebrew, literally, the Sea of Reeds. Most English Bibles translate it as the Red Sea, following the Septuagint. The location is debated. The geography is debated. The route is debated. What is not debated is the theological geometry. A body of water stands between God's people and the empire that enslaved them. God opens a path through. The people walk out free. The chase ends in the water. That is the shape of the gospel 3,000 years before Calvary. This is where the conversation between Moses and God becomes the strangest in the whole Bible. Sinai is the destination. 3 months out of Egypt, Israel reaches the mountain. God descends in fire and smoke. The mountain shakes. The people are terrified and tell Moses, "You speak with us, but do not let God speak with us, lest we die." Moses goes up alone. What follows is the giving of the law, the 10 Commandments, the covenant, the instructions for the tabernacle. 40 days on the mountain. While Moses is gone, the people make a golden calf. Aaron, the same Aaron who was supposed to help Moses, gives in to the demand and shapes the calf with his own hands. God tells Moses what is happening. The Lord's anger burns. And then God says something that should stop you cold. Exodus chapter 32, verse 10. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation. God is offering to start over, to wipe Israel out and rebuild the covenant through Moses, the way he rebuilt humanity through Noah. And Moses says no. He does not just refuse, he argues. He reminds God of God's own promises to Abraham. He warns God that the Egyptians will say God brought his people out only to kill them. He says, "If you will not forgive their sin, blot me out of the book that you have written." Moses offers his own name in exchange for the people. He tells God to take him instead. And the text says, "The Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on his people." Take a moment with that. The text shows you a prophet talking God into mercy. There is a long tradition of Jewish and Christian interpretation that asks what is actually happening here. Some read it as Moses passing a test. God wanted to see whether the prophet would intercede or take the offer. Others read it as a genuine dialogue where God's people change God's plans through prayer. Either way, the picture is unmistakable. Moses argues. God listens. The relationship is not one way. And it does not end there. Exodus chapter 33. Moses asks God to show him his glory. God says, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. But you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." God puts Moses in the cleft of a rock and passes by. And he proclaims a name to Moses that becomes the heart of the Old Testament's theology of God. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. The Hebrew word for steadfast love is chesed, covenant loyalty, mercy that does not give up. That word will get repeated all the way through the Psalms and the prophets, and it was given to Moses in the cleft of a rock, after Moses talked God out of destroying his own people. That is the kind of friendship Moses has with God. Argued, bargained, bruised, won. Now the story slows. Moses comes down from Sinai with the second set of tablets, and his face is shining. Exodus 34:29. The Hebrew word for shining is karan. It comes from a root that can mean to send out rays, or to grow horns. Some medieval translators rendered it as horns, which is why the famous Michelangelo statue of Moses has horns on his head. The standard modern reading is light. His face shines because he has been talking with God face to face. The people are afraid to come near him, so Moses puts a veil over his face when he speaks to them, and takes it off when he speaks with God. The veil becomes a kind of metaphor for the rest of Moses' life, the prophet whose intimacy with God puts a distance between him and the people he serves. Then come the wilderness years, the 40 years between Sinai and the Jordan. Most of those years the text passes over quickly. The story records the rebellions, the complaints, the plagues among the people, the deaths of the original generation. By the time Israel reaches the edge of the Promised Land, almost everyone who left Egypt is dead. Only Joshua and Caleb remain from the original adults. And then, Numbers 20. The people are at Meribah. There is no water. Moses and Aaron go before God, and God says, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and Aaron your brother, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield its water." Speak to the rock. That is the command. Moses does not speak to it. He strikes it twice. The water comes. The people drink. But God says to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them." There is the verdict. The man who has spent 40 years arguing his way into a promised land will not be allowed to enter it. The story does not soften the moment. The leader fails. The consequence stands. And it is here that Moses, near the end, does something most leaders cannot. He keeps leading. He writes Deuteronomy. He blesses the tribes. He sings a song of warning to a generation that has not yet entered. He climbs Mount Nebo and looks across the Jordan at the land he has dreamed of for 80 years. And then he dies. The text in Deuteronomy 34 is almost unbearable in its tenderness. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord, and he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab. But no one knows the place of his burial to this day. He buried him. God himself buries his friend. The Hebrew is striking. The verb is singular. There is no human witness. There is no human gravedigger. There is only the Lord, and a body, and a hidden place no one will ever find. This is the man who argued with God on the mountain, and in the end, the same God who heard the arguments lays him down with his own hand. The grave is hidden because the relationship was personal. The friendship between Moses and God ends the way friendships end, quietly, alone, in a place only the friend knows about. And Joshua picks up the staff. The next leader is already trained. The story does not stop because Moses does. The promise outlives the prophet. Moses argued with God, ran from God, bargained with God, failed God, and was buried by God's own hands. That is the story your feltboard lessons never told you. The Bible is not embarrassed by his arguments. The Bible records them. It records the excuses at the bush. It records the bargaining at Sinai. It records the staff striking the rock. It records the grave in Moab. And it gives him the highest title the Hebrew Bible knows. Deuteronomy 34:10 says, "There has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face." Not the prophet who never doubted, the prophet who argued, the prophet God knew face to face. Your doubts do not disqualify you. Your reluctance does not disqualify you. The God who called the runaway is the God who knows your name too. If this opened something for you, leave one word in the comments, even one. Share this with someone who needs to hear that arguing with God is not the opposite of faith. Subscribe if you want more of these character studies. And as always, God bless you.